Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Barbarian and this is Dev Diary number 94 for CK3. Anatomy of a Struggle is a very important Dev Diary because it covers everything from how the Iberian struggle works all the way to how struggles work in general, what their concept is and what their potential is. And let me tell you, the concept and the potential is insane because it is not just, a part of the free update, it is also insanely moddable, and maybe more importantly, I think, it adds a variety of concepts that could be utilized that are very different from one another, but all are struggles into the sphere of the possible. Previously, it wouldn't have been this way, but now it is. I've seen the most amazing to the most disgusting ideas. For example, I've seen the idea of saying, hey, every romance scheme is no longer just a scheme, it's a struggle. When you become depressed in the game, it's a struggle. It can be a struggle where your friends are interlopers, you are involved, and they can influence you, and it ends in a positive or negative fashion. All of these are, of course, a bit ridiculous, but it showcases the idea where it embeds something that accompanies you for a limited amount of time. Think about it, traditions, technology, new laws, all of these things will likely stay with you. It is very, very uncommon that you regularly take out a tradition in your culture and, just put something else in. Commonly, you just put new things in as they become available. Struggles are different because they come with phases. They make it so that you want to do certain things, that you don't want to do certain things in certain moments. It is a dynamic way of playing the game that before this, I think, in most mechanics wasn't fully represented in this way. Stress, for example, also captures it quite well. What I'm saying here essentially is there are some insane ideas. We're going to go over all of these. Let's just go over the struggle feature as we start. Today we're going to be talking about the new struggle feature, the basic pitch. A struggle is a long-form conflict, generally not just a war, though they likely include them, covering a particular chunk of the map. They have different phases, each of which have different variant gameplay rules. For example, holy wars are disabled, characters of different religions may marry without restriction. I think both of these were mentioned in the Iberian screenshots already. And then we have Jerusalem can't declare or be declared war on. The last one will not be in the game when the new patch releases. That's just an example of what you can do. And it does bring me to a topic that I just want to really cut into for a second so that you can keep it in mind as we go through the mechanics and make your own choice, make your own, conclusion when it comes to whether these mechanics are good for this sort of struggle or bad. There are two core struggle ideas, I think, that people are currently suggesting that the team is seeing and that, of course, modders are thinking about. The first one is much like the Iberian struggle. You have a very specific region, you have a very specific population and character set, and that is a struggle. You write flavor events for it, you are very specific about what is going on. It is a very appropriate and very well-defined struggle. Another example of this could, for example, be, as they say right here, Jerusalem, the Crusades, where you say, hey, under these hyper-specific circumstances that are quite likely to happen if we have these systems such as the Crusade ready for it, you will trigger a struggle, and this struggle will have very specific flavor, very specific mechanics, very specific phases. You also could apply this, of course, to, for example, the Teutonic Order invading the Baltic. At that point, that is fairly similar to Jerusalem, I would say, but this is a very specific situation. And then the other side of the coin are generic dynamic struggles. That is an idea that devs have been hesitant about so far, at the very least, when we talk to them in, open forums, in, for example, Discords, all that sort of stuff. And I understand why they are hesitant, don't get me wrong here, because Iberia basically adds this rich embedded circumstance to the map where you say, this is specific to Iberia, it comes with very specific flavor and so on, but I gotta tell you, I think generic struggles have a lot of potential that shouldn't be dismissed, and this can be for both geographic but also for non-geographic, and what I mean with that we'll see in a second, and non-geographic struggles. Think, for example, about the following. Let's say you are hasty, let's say you invade France, let's say you invade Russia, let's say you invade the Balkans, let's say you invade Tunisia, India, Georgia, whatever you want to invade. In each one of these situations, once, for example, you control X counties, or there are 30% of the rulers that are in this region are of a non-native culture or religion circumstances, you could trigger a generic struggle that is basically assimilation, just status quo, or cooperation. Where are you going? Are you merging with them? Are you putting yourself, your ways, your rights, your traditions on top of them? Or are you, basically accepting theirs? Are you converting towards their culture? This is a question that already to a degree is addressed in the idea of hybridizing a culture, don't get me wrong here, but what I am suggesting is this idea where you say all of these things are struggles. We are invaders, they see us as attackers, they might want to get rid of us. All of these things could last for 2 years, they could last for 200 years. And I think that isn't a bad way of implementing something like this. Other suggestions that I've seen from modders are what I would call non-geographical struggles. What I mean with this is that basically, assume for example Poland in 867 or Bohemia or Scandinavia or Russia are being mass converted, for example, to Orthodoxy, to Islam, to Catholicism. And when this happens, the game represents this as a fairly clean cut. You do it, it happens. Maybe some rulers, some other folks are in a position where they say, hey, I haven't adopted the new religion yet, but I might if you just convert me, right? These things in real life were much more complex. Poland and Bohemia both were, they had many pagan influences for at least 100 years each after the actual Christianization. And this is something that happened wherever you had such a radical break from old religious tradition. That is a struggle. And it isn't really a struggle that is actually localized. Of course, it is localized in the region of Poland, but it is a struggle that occurs internally. Another struggle that was suggested, I think, here on the forums, but that we also discussed at length in the Discord, is the question of, for example, inheritances. Look at the Carolingian Empire. Technically speaking, in 867, the Carolingian Empire still existed. Louis II, the younger king of Italy, was also the emperor. Was he respected? No, not at all, but it is a question of, hey, right now, there is no interaction between these kings at all. Yes, they may have claims on one another, but the question of technically, nominally speaking, you have, you know, the right to rule over us. None of these questions are addressed anywhere. This could be used as a generalized system for partition. Let's say you have confederate partition, they split, but technically speaking, the primary heir is supposed to be the leader of this now confederation. The term confederated inheritance is actually so frustrating to me because there is no confederation. They are all individual realms now. With a struggle, you could symbolize this and you could either lead towards more centralization or towards decentralization. This is for this sort of struggle. It could be, for example, for feudalization. Feudalization was a difficult and multi-layered process because there is no quote-unquote feudalism. That is a bit of a meme word right there. Obviously, we use it for practicality, but in reality, it is much more complex. This is a struggle that could also be showcased as a non-geographical struggle. It would be generic, but it could be possible. What am I saying? With all the struggles that I just presented to you, with the specific struggles, but then also with the generic struggles, be they geographic or be they non-geographic, please keep in mind that these ideas are floating around, that they are possible. It's not just the War of the Five Kings or, the White Walkers that could be a struggle. It could also be the question of inheritance in general. It could be the question of church reform that could be a struggle as well. It could be so much as the investiture crisis. It could be an issue of church against country. I think all of these things are very, very interesting, whether they work as something else, but again, I want to highlight them so that you have them in your mind, so that the devs have them in their mind when the public discusses it. The more people know about it, the more people think about it, I think the more will we see interesting approaches by both modders and devs. Anyway, so this is basically the potential of struggles that comes out of just one line here that I can't stop talking about. There's so many tangents that I could go on, but okay, let's just continue, right? Phases. Progress between each other by way of catalyst-specific gameplay actions. Declare war on an involved character. Two involved characters become soulmates, so hostile and friendly, that accrue points towards a future phase. When enough points are accrued, the phase changes to a new one. Struggles can resolve permanently, affecting their area in some way through dramatic and difficult ending decisions. They are assumed to last at least a couple of centuries. A conqueror carving out a new realm from the ruins of an old giant wouldn't be a struggle by itself, but if it includes dramatic aftershocks that last for generations, then it just might be. I contest this. I contest this statement. A conqueror carving out their own realm is always something that leaves dramatic aftershocks that last for generations. This is why I am so in favor of generic struggles. Right? This idea that it isn't actually something that leaves aftershocks, I can't think of a single case there. Right? We had certain circumstances where they got fairly assimilated fairly quickly. We had certain circumstances where, for example, the Normans assimilated themselves, but this was not as easy as just saying, I took it over and now I'm assimilated. This is a long process. Christianization, Islamification, those are long processes that take a long, long time. And I think, I'm just saying, generic struggles wouldn't be misplaced here. Let's move on to the philosophy before we get lost in the sauce. So, why are we introducing this mechanic attached to a flavor pack? Well, simply put, we didn't think we could do the historical realities of Iberia justice without something like this. The changing moods and temperaments of the peninsula over different decades, the way particular activities fluctuated between oddly permissive, by the standards of much of the rest of the world, and intensely strict, the role of notable characters and their policies in shaping the shifting tides of public opinion, whether intentionally or not. I love this. I mean, this is just the right approach to Iberia. All the debate about theoretical struggle implementations aside, Iberia in CK2 was a difficult beast because you just had this mechanic where you basically had mini crusades that you could go on via the Reconquista, and it was a fairly 2D, a fairly simple process that ultimately was implemented there. It didn't give the region what it deserved, and again, this struggle system doubtlessly has the right approach. Medieval Iberia is just such a fascinating smorgasbord of mercurial special rules that we had to create a system that would allow us to model them, one that guided roleplay whilst giving it consequences and provided default end goals for players other than just conquering all of Hispania. Though Iberia badly needed such a thing, it would have been a waste to create a system tailored for only Iberia. Complex and shifting local circumstances and long-form conflicts that don't always take the form of actively prosecuted warfare are things seen in many parts of the world, and a setting-agnostic system that catered to the peninsula could be easily repurposed elsewhere. Seemed like a very worthwhile project to spend time on. Huge fan. Huge fan. This is just the way it is. I've heard it a number of times when people ask, hey, the Byzantine Empire, what do you do about it? You know, obviously it's not in a good state. There needs to be a lot of work done to give you an effective system, an effective reality for it. I, have heard it so often from the mods, where they, from the devs, from the devs, where they basically said, we do not want to make a system just for the Byzantines. It needs to be a system that describes reality, and that reality should be able to be applied outside of the Byzantines. If they can do it with Iberia, I trust that they will be able to do it with the Eastern Roman Empire. Very excited to see whatever they were to cook up for that. But even the Eastern Roman Empire, I mean, the conflict against the Seljuks struggle, quite clearly. Internally, what they are doing there, I mean, struggle. I would like a different dedicated mechanic, but I'm just saying it could be emulated where the power of the Emperor is, where the government form of the Emperor is, all that stuff. Really, really interesting. Anyway, this is the philosophy. Basically, they took the situation in Iberia, said this could apply elsewhere as well if we do it right, and then they did it. Now, how does it actually work? Struggles are, first and foremost, local things. Local to large areas. Iberia, for instance, is a decently sized little peninsula, but still local. The most basic thing that defines them is the struggle region, a predefined group of titles that the rules of the struggle apply within. Any region or combination of regions can be defined in the appropriate parameter. At the moment, these are static and only take regions, but we are considering other options, for example, titles, regions selected as part of the starting effect, etc. for the future. Very interesting. I like in particular the titles, because of course this could mean that any internal strife that you have, instead of expressing it just in a yes or no faction, either the faction succeeds or the faction fails, you could have as a struggle, tug of war between loyalists, between the leading side of the realm, and then of course rebels. This sort of stuff, transforming factions more into societies that interact with the struggle, would be something that I would love. Again, we are here on the front of the generic struggle. This is why I'm saying there are so many potential applications for this. This right here is the struggle region. It is Iberia, as you can see. Cultures and faiths are regarded as either involved or not. This defines whether a specific culture or faith is seen as being a part of the in-group for the region, even when members of that in-group may occasionally or frequently be very hostile to each other. For the Iberian struggle, for instance, a Castilian and an Andalusian both understand the changing nature of the peninsula instinctively in a way that an Anglo-Saxon would struggle to acclimate to. Makes sense, of course. You have the situation here where they are natives. They have seen this struggle for a while now. They have participated in it at the start, or they were in it at the very start. If you come in as an Anglo-Saxon, you might say this is funky business right here, but to actually participate in it fully, to understand it, you would have to, for example, hybridize with one of the native cultures right there. Cultures become involved either on first starting a struggle manually via a script, or automatically when a certain percentage of their total counties are within the struggle region. The number is set per struggle, currently at 80% for the Iberian struggle. Understandable. So a hybridized culture, if they are there, this will happen. They explain it here as well. Hybrids and divergent cultures automatically become involved if they convert at least one county within the region on creation. Makes a lot of sense. This is basically looking at a situation where hybrids and diverged cultures, if they are created here, if they stem from the struggle region, they will be a part of it. This is nice. This is dynamic. It accounts for the changes made in the Royal Court patch. No, basically nothing from me. I hope that you could do some stuff here as well, like maybe it's not just cultures or faiths. You could define this via, I don't know, What house, what dynasty are you from? Oh my god, what about dynastic feuds? There are so many non-geographical struggles that I could come up with, but maybe they should have their dedicated systems. Anyway, it's just interesting to think about. Neither cultures nor faiths lose their involvement automatically. Once they're in permanently, unless manually removed via script. For Fate of Iberia, this is necessary to keep the ruling class of Al-Andalus, predominantly culturally insular families of Arabs or Berbers, involved, but it's generally there to prevent wonky behavior with struggles incorporating cultures and faiths from beyond their region, who don't actually have counties within it. A simpler example would be a hypothetical Anglo-Norman struggle for after the conquest. We'd probably want to set Norman up as an involved culture and wouldn't want them to immediately become uninvolved because there are no Norman counties in the British Isles. The Anglo-Norman conflict. I mean, of course, you know, the Harrying of the North, it was a major event. It was a genocide that William the Bastard committed there to suppress the North, and this is a topic that currently isn't pictured at all. It can happen should the North rebel and you act violently against them, but the actual struggle and the struggle between these two cultures, I mean, the Normans and even all the way down to Richard the Lionheart, for example, they had no respect for England. Richard the Lionheart primarily wrote his poetry in Aquitanian, in Occitan actually, because that was the language that he perceived to be more beautiful, where he perceived the cosmopolitan life to take place, the urban life, whereas Britain was seen as a bit of a backwater country. And this is very, very interesting because, of course, Britain never recovered from that insult morally, but more importantly, it puts us in a situation where this struggle could occur even within a single realm, right? This is what Wokek is suggesting here on a very rudimentary level, and I really like the idea. It puts us in a situation where we could say many, many different processes of taking over land that is so different from you could lead to this sort of struggle. Now, but characters, though. Within the region, characters are defined by their personal involvement, the degree to which they are considered part of the ongoing medley of social and cultural fluctuations that define an actor's struggle, and so how other characters and counties treat them. There are 3 levels to involvement: involved, interloper, and uninvolved. Makes sense. Involved characters are those who are wholeheartedly engaged in the unique power dynamics of the struggle and seen as insiders within the region. Both their culture and faith must be flagged as being involved in the struggle, and either their capital is located within the struggle region, or if they are unlanded, they are physically there. You can't be involved unless you are of the right religion and culture and your capital is there. This is what this means for any player, because we are never unlanded. Interlopers are active within a struggle's region but don't quite grasp exactly how or why people from the region act the way they do. They generally do not benefit from variant struggle rules as much as involved characters, but also aren't as heavily restricted by them. Either their culture, their faith, or both are not flagged as being involved in the struggle, but their capital is located within the region. So to be an interloper, have your capital in the region and not have both your culture and faith flagged. Uninvolved characters are outsiders and outlanders. Regardless of culture or faith, if their capital is located outside of the struggle region, or if they are landless and physically not there, a character is considered uninvolved in that struggle. Oh, actually, small correction here, right? So you need to have your capital in the struggle region and then not have one of your culture or faith flagged, right? That makes sense. Uninvolved characters are outsiders and outlanders. Regardless of culture or faith, if their capital is located outside of the struggle region, or if they're landless and physically not there, a character is considered uninvolved in that struggle. So even if they are the right culture and faith, if you aren't present in that location, you're no longer participating. It makes a lot of sense. Uninvolved characters are generally expected to take penalties for holding counties within a struggle region, encouraging them to either delegate to vassals with a better level of involvement, or else getting more involved themselves. This is interesting. This is a very, very interesting design decision, because the idea here is that in CK3, where multicultural and multi-religious realms now are completely viable thanks to the new systems integrated via the Royal Code update, they are now trying to establish the idea that you want to put people in charge in these regions that can actually participate in the struggle. Unless you yourself want to participate by moving your capital and then becoming an interloper, right? But the base idea here, yet again, is to say, let's make this a multicultural, a multi-religious, a multifaceted realm, rather than, oh look, I'm France, I invaded Catalonia, there are Frenchmen everywhere. Instead, you might be inspired, to put something else down there. For example, folks that indeed are in a position of being involved, and instead of just being an interloper, that would be a French person with a capital in Catalonia. But instead of just being an interloper, being involved and actually participating with a full set of variant rules. Here we have the list. Again, very, very interesting so far. Your realm capital is in the struggle region, your faith is involved in the struggle, and your culture is involved as well. I wonder, could you do this with dynasty, with house? Man, that would be some cool stuff. Participants, 173, 4 faiths and 11 cultures. Right, we got all the classic people here. Nothing, I think, too surprising looking at these folks. Let's talk about phases. Alright, so now we know how struggle covers an area and how people are divided up into categories. What do these categories and this area actually do? Each phase reflects a sort of mood or temperament within a struggle region specific to that struggle, the outcome of many prior actions leading to a shifting tide of general opinion about what is and isn't acceptable. Maybe some things that were taboo became mainstream for a time, and things otherwise considered acceptable are balked at by even very conservative characters. And we'll talk about how exactly you transition between phases a bit more in a moment. It's worth noting that each phase has at least one and usually more future phase predefined for it. A phase that actions take in the course of play will gradually move into the region's mood towards. Right. Many words, what does it mean? It means you are in a phase, and in this phase you can do certain actions, and then the phase will change. Within the Iberian struggle, phases are on a loosely even cycle. Though there's some lateral movement and backtracking possible, they mostly move evenly in a circle. This is purely a design choice, and even more esoteric flows are entirely scriptable. These could be choose-your-own-adventure trees, okay? You could literally do a roleplay game within the struggle system where it isn't a circle, but instead it is a changing, a developing story. Oh, I hate saying this. Oh, that... In CK2, I wasn't a big fan. Oh my god, in CK2 I wasn't a big fan of the Rise to Power mod. I think it was a marvelous piece of work, but gameplay-wise, it was very boring. I think that is the general consensus there. Because you didn't do anything. You just waited, earned some money, bought a title, and then you would emerge in normal CK2 gameplay. Good for roleplay background, right? But not good for actual gameplay. Couldn't you do this in a sort of choose-your-own-adventure with specific cycles that actually are cycles, but then the option to free yourself from it? Imagine the following, right? And this is just me pitching this. I don't know. But imagine the following. You are a wanderer. You have a cycle of being given ranks. That is the end decision. If you basically take enough actions that make it so that the king, count, duke, whatever is giving you a title. Be that an actual title or be that something else. And this comes in different phases. Maybe, for example, if the court is at war, this could move you into a war phase. If the court is at peace, it would be a peace phase, right? These sort of things. And you can take different actions, different activities there that you can participate in. And the end decision to end the struggle would be to move to a different court, to take a title, or maybe, I don't know what the other, you know where I'm coming from, right? Maybe in the wartime, you could, for example, you could participate in the army, you could actually be a knight. Man, I honestly think maybe this system could embed a genuine choose-your-own-adventure style, very much not very embedded in CK3 normal gameplay, don't get me wrong here, but I think this might be able to make Rise to Power interesting. Because it actually gives you like this interface where you can see what is going on, what you can do, and so on and so forth. What an odd... I can't believe that I am like, maybe this would be good. Seriously, I was not a fan of Rise to Power, but I don't know, I could see it. Again, a non-geographical struggle right there. Manifesting the mood. The actual effects of each phase can be split into 3 broad categories. Parameters, character modifiers, and county modifiers. These are then further split by the involvement of different characters. Parameters work similarly to doctrine parameters and faiths, or tradition parameters for cultures. They are special rules entirely defined within script and so fully moddable. Great stuff. That can be referred to elsewhere in script to unlock unique content, provide special exemptions, or block off specific actions. Makes a lot of sense. For example, in one phase, involved characters might be able to intermarry between faiths. In another, interlopers might receive cheaper holy wars, whilst involved characters have them blocked entirely. And in both, uninvolved characters may be blocked from culture converting involved cultures. The distinction here between interloper and involved is actually really interesting and really unique, because it does make it so that as a modder, as a dev, you can define very, very different rule sets for people in the same region for a temporary period. I really like this. I think this is a good approach. There's nothing really negative that I can say, especially with the fact that it's fully moddable. What can you say, right? Let's take a look at this culture effect. You are involved in the Iberian struggle. Common culture effects. Using promote culture within the struggle region, so both for interlopers and involved, proceeds faster. Effects only for involved. Releasing prisoners of a different culture provides prestige. Opinion of different cultures plus 10. Different culture opinion plus 10. Cultural acceptance gain plus 50%. And max learn language schemes plus 1. So this is hugely positive if you want to interact with other cultures, if you want to be friendly with them, if you want to engage on that level. I think the lesson that modders in particular should draw from this is that the effects should always drive somebody to play in a way that then leads to the next phase. If you really have these sort of modifiers that, you know, the catalysts that we will see in a second here, that trigger a new phase, you're looking at a situation where it must feel natural to do these things, and if it doesn't, then people won't engage in it and the system falls apart. Modders really need to take care to buff stuff that really matters and that you will benefit from because it leads you into the next phase. So the phase right now should prep you towards it should encourage you to play in a way that really then fulfills the requirements for the next phase. If you don't do that, this system falls apart. I think this is also very important to point out. This struggle system, as great as it is, as flexible as it is, I think it is fragile in the sense that as a designer, be that a dev or a modder, you need to be very careful in how it is designed so that it feels good and natural. If you don't do that, then it might very well backfire. Character modifiers can be applied directly to involved or interloper characters. This generally chiefly affects involved characters, making some things easier and others harder, but we also use it to let interlopers occasionally have an easier time of bending or breaking local rules, because of course they aren't really following them. Though these are our current guidelines, since these are entirely scriptable, they can be changed according to the tonal needs of any given struggle. Uninvolved characters do not have a character modifier slot. We don't want characters in India getting negative modifiers for not being involved or interlopers in a struggle in Iberia. That's pretty funny. Finally, we have county modifiers. These are applied to any county in the struggle region according to the direct holder of each county and their involvement. They generally have situational variables depending on phase for involved characters, mild to moderate debuffs for interlopers, and moderate to heavy debuffs for uninvolved characters. Right. Yeah, so if you hold territory in Iberia and your capital isn't there, you're uninvolved. And that's how you get the heavy debuff. And you get the game to hand it out. Or the game gets you to hand it out to somebody that will be at least an interloper, maybe even involved, and they can actually take full advantage of the phase that they are in. Catalysts. Transitioning from a phase to any of its future phases requires the activation of catalysts, notable events, gameplay actions, and consequences to existing mechanics that drive the current phase towards a specific future phase. Long sentences. Catalysts themselves can be anything. A war being declared, a type of character being seduced, a certain type of scheme failing, and so on. A character getting syphilis, a character stumbling, a character dying due to an assassination, a character getting divorced, a character exchanging their court priest. This is what I'm talking about, right? The many, many options that you have here really put us into a situation where struggles can be used for so many nonsensical things. You could have a struggle about your marital bliss. It's a stupid idea, don't get me wrong here. But you could be in a struggle with your wife and you as involved, with your family, friends and enemies as interlopers and everybody else uninvolved, where, you know, you can take certain romantic actions to keep the romance going. Is it a stupid idea? Yes. It really is, but what I'm saying is even that stupid idea could be embedded via the catalysts if you make it fit. If one of your friends insults you and your wife doesn't console you, maybe that leads you towards the negative phase of your marriage, where you then have to see a psychotherapist to recover. These are the sort of things that can be done here. I love the system, what can I say, right? It's just such beautiful nonsense that can be done, but also such beautiful, genuine, great mechanics that could be involved here. Seriously, big fan. These catalysts are set inside a phase's future phase block, and as with other elements of struggles, are entirely scriptable. Virtually any effect block in the entire title can be made into a catalyst with a bit of thought. Whenever a catalyst is activated, meaning that the thing that sets them happens, the current phase gains points towards the future phase that catalyst was tied to. For instance, a notable interfaith marriage might help an uncertainty-focused phase gain points towards a tolerance-focused phase. Catalysts themselves are repeatable, and the points they give vary with the difficulty of the catalyst in question. Two notable characters becoming soulmates might well be worth more points than the notable character being executed, for instance. Points are put into simple tallies. When one tally for a future phase is met, that future phase becomes the new current phase, though there's a grace period of a month before the actual switch. If I insult my wife, boom, triggers a new phase. The new phase is hostility. We can now declare holy wars, but there is a grace period. Again, really good stuff what can be done with it. We should note the existence of one special catalyst, the passage of time. Every phase has a default future phase and receives a single point per year towards that phase's tally, representing the natural trend of public discourse towards particular conclusions. This can, and essentially always will, be overridden and exacerbated by more dramatic catalysts being activated, but even in very calm struggles, change is always coming. This could literally be how feudalization works. You have the general process, the more you interact with foreign powers, the more you are relying on organized faith like the Magyars did, the more are you, formalizing your hierarchy, the more is feudalization progressing, and then you are pushed towards feudalization. If you say no to this, if you say we don't want this authority, we want decentralized authority, for example, or we want more informal authority, as you oftentimes had them in non-feudal societies, again the term is nonsense, but you could have this be a phase that you need to actively work for. Insane potential, insane potential. Obviously, very different topic. Again, you need to consider this also for the non-generic struggles. Jerusalem can do so much here. You could have compromises, you could have aggression, fairly similar, I would argue, to Iberia, but in general, of course, much more interesting because it is about a holy site, right? It is about this main holy land that must be maintained, that must be kept open. All that stuff would be interesting. Man, in Jerusalem even, you could do stuff like, I don't know, if you're Jerusalem, you get unique actions such as forbid Muslims from entering the city, right? And that can then lead you further towards hostility, which then allows the Muslims, for example, to either declare cheaper wars, to create holy orders. So much potential. Unbelievable. Unbelievable that this is the mechanic that is coming now. I'm very ecstatic about it. Ending decisions. Let's talk about these. A core part of the identity of struggles is that they are not things that can be solved just by painting the map. After all, if they were, then the Iberian struggle would have ended in its first decade, when Musa ibn Nusayr had essentially subjugated the entire peninsula. This is why I'm saying, me invading somewhere and seemingly conquering everything should never mean that that is the state that it is. These things take a long time. The Norman invasion in Normandy, well, the Northman invasion, took ages to actually then have a coherent relationship to the French kings, have a coherent relationship to itself, to its culture, and to the other Vikings. Similar to how, if Hastings conquers Georgia, maybe we have a struggle with everybody living in that region because things just change dramatically. It is a struggle. Quite literally indeed. We wanted to provide more difficult and interesting goals for ending a struggle than just conquering the whole struggle region. After all, it really doesn't matter if you've conquered everyone if that hasn't dealt with the underlying societal causes besetting a struggle locale. Makes sense. I mean, ultimately, you conquering everything doesn't mean that the struggle itself, that the issue itself has ended. You actually have to take the action. In order for a struggle to be endable through the usual flow, at least one phase must have an ending decision defined, though they can be ended manually through script also. The Iberian struggle has 3 ending decisions, each tied both mechanically and thematically to a different phase. So we have 3 things, and each thing can be triggered in a different phase, right? So those are the decisions that we've seen. There was a lot of hypothesizing, I think, about there potentially being 9 ending decisions, but it is 3 for the Iberian struggle. Hostile, status quo, and cooperation. To finish up, let's take a look at the new Iberian struggles design, though I'll put an obligatory reminder that this stuff isn't final, and that we generally continue to adjust things as we balance and playtest. The Iberian struggle phases are opportunity, hostility, compromise, and conciliation. Opportunity can lead to either hostility or conciliation, depending on how the peninsula's leaders treat each other, so either it worsens relationships or it makes them better. It depends on who you are, what you want, and what the people around you want and who they are, whilst both hostility and conciliation respectively build or degrade towards compromise, which in turn decays into opportunity, starting the cycle again. Makes sense? This is the cycle. It brings you into different stages. Who knows how long these stages are? Ultimately, this is a balancing issue. You know, how quickly the tallies fill up. But let's say one stage, 10 years. I think we saw actually hostility has way fewer points necessary to progress out of it than opportunity. So I assume opportunity maybe like 15 years, then hostility for 5, and then we're back in a much more mellow environment. This is interesting because you can do this in whatever way you want. A struggle can last for 100 years, you know, if that, or a struggle phase can last for 100 years, if that is what you want in your design vision. But of course, a big boon here is the temporary nature of the modifiers, of the rules that you get per phase, so probably not necessarily advisable. In opportunity, Iberia is approaching a stage of uncertainty after notable spikes, hostile or friendly, in prior relations between faiths and cultures have abated. Struggle modifiers and parameters make war easier and cheaper, changing cultures and faiths easier and cheaper, but also unlock interfaith marriages and block off holy wars. Friendly interrelations between disparate characters activate catalysts, guiding it towards conciliation, whilst violent ones do the same for hostility. Again, this is why it is so important that you have effects in the rule set, right? That engage the player and make them play natively towards whatever drives towards, struggle phase A or struggle phase B. If it's not native, then it will feel very inorganic. It will feel very arcadey. So I am very happy to see that if you look at this, for example, if you want to go towards conciliation, changing culture, interfaith marriage, all that stuff is easier and cheaper. All of a sudden making it so that it feels very, very natural with a character that wants to reconcile with, for example, the Muslims or vice versa, to actually reconcile. It feels much easier because the game says, hey, if you want to go this way, here are the tools. Big fan of this approach. This needs to be connected. Seriously, modders need to interconnect this or we're gonna have struggles that won't feel right. For hostility, aggressive actors have brought tensions to a simmering fever pitch, and even the slightest differences may be cause for aggressive persecution. The phase's effects make wars cheaper and more brutal for all involved, reduce economic and technological progress, and increase the capacity of many characters for hostile schemes. Interesting. Violence can't persist forever though, and either efforts at building bridges or simple exhaustion will eventually bring even the most volatile, violent hostility phase towards compromise. Very, very interesting. Increase the capacity of many characters for hostile schemes. Does it mean I can have like 3 hostile schemes in total? Either way, cool stuff. Again, this is the thing where hell breaks loose and then you calm down again. Standing opposite hostility is conciliation, where pragmatic politicking builds bridges between even very disparate realms. Characters in this phase aren't really tolerant by the modern meaning of the word, but many of the harsher biases of their time are temporarily dropped or ignored in the name of expediency. Wars become more expensive and truces longer, but there's opportunity to unite against outsiders intervening in Iberian matters, and ruling over more multicultural and multi-faith realms becomes easier and more beneficial. Very cool. Makes sense. Even the most wholeheartedly supported conciliation phase decays towards compromise eventually. Finally, compromise. In this phase, Iberia has reached a point of equilibrium. Wars are less likely and most costly, but economic investment and other forms of passive stability are easier and better, whilst interfaith marriages flourish. The exhausted pragmatism of compromise isn't permanent, and will someday give rise to the cynical dynamism of opportunity. The cycle begins anew. Naturally, we've peppered all of this with phase-specific events, I again can't talk anymore, decisions, interactions, the RCB, and so on. Most phases also add variant unlocking criteria to existing pieces of content, adjusting the circumstances under which things like the claim throne scheme or found holy order decision can be used. Most commonly, temporarily extending them to characters who'd usually not have access. Oh man. So the claim throne scheme might be possible even if I don't have the perk, making it so that realms sometimes just become more dangerous. They just do. Big fan. Say you don't want to move on from a phase though. Maybe you think hostility is the place for you, or you'd prefer a more permanent conciliation and want to break the endless cycle of social transmutation. Well, unless you want permanent opportunity, you're in luck, because we've got ending decisions for hostility, compromise, and conciliation. Right, makes a lot of sense. These are the 3 main phases. Opportunity, of course, is more the in-between phase, but these are the 3 ones, and then here we have the dominance ending. It is time for a strong leader to finally drag this peninsula from the mire of war and division. Iberia will be united under a Mualadi king flying the our dynasty banner, I assume. Hostility's ending decision is dominance, reflecting the final ascension of one of Iberia's warring states to a position of not just military dominance, but social and spiritual hegemony. This gives your house an incredibly powerful modifier, making county and faith conversion within Iberia markedly faster, because again it is dominance, you want to assimilate everybody else, improving relations with those who share your faith or culture, but markedly worsening them with other involved cultures or faiths, and making holy wars and conquests cheaper and easier to access. It requires holding several important duchies, having a monocultural, monofaith primary kingdom, and being the only major player independent ruler in Iberia. Major player independent ruler. I wonder how they define this. Probably a certain size, maybe a certain income, certain troop size, who knows. Either way, makes sense. This is complete dominance. This is the historical ending, of course. Then we have détente. The wounds of the past centuries will not be easily healed, but we must try if the peninsula is to find a lasting peace. Truly, Iberia belongs to us all. Conciliation's ending decision is detongue, making temporary accommodations into more permanent ones. Involved cultures gain a huge amount of cultural acceptance with each other, a house modifier that improves the opinion of different faiths and cultures, and several signature mechanics of the conciliation phase become permanent for involved culture characters within Iberia, namely interfaith marriage and disabled holy wars. Additionally, Iberian characters may join defensive wars for targets within Iberia against any aggressor from outside of Iberia. This is the genuine multi-religious, multi-cultural ending right here, right? Where you say, we work together, we live in this area, it is our area, and we shall defend it together. Our differences are what they are. Very, very interesting ending. It requires a certain level of fame, being allied to every other independent involved Iberian ruler, and completely controlling an Iberian kingdom without controlling more than a certain fraction of Iberian territory. Interesting. I like everything. The only thing I'm skeptical about is without controlling more than a certain fraction of Iberian territory. I'm skeptical about this primarily because I feel like this ending could also be achieved by somebody ruling the entirety of Iberia, but being very friendly, right? Making it so that every vassal has religious rights, making it so that every culture is respected, that no culture is ruled by other territory or by another culture, that sort of stuff. I think it should be possible, right? But anyway, I mean, I get it. This is so significantly different. You need a bit of a hurdle, and that hurdle is don't blob endlessly. Makes sense. Status quo. These endless conflicts over the peninsula only weaken us all. It is time to accept that Iberia was never meant to be united and instead be content with bataljavs. So this is what you do if you don't want to achieve any of the other endings. Compromises ending's decision is status quo. Where dominance is enforcing will and detongue finding accommodation, status quo is accepting that times have changed, that attempts to unite the peninsula are futile, and that its peoples and realms should go their separate ways and leave their neighbors be. Status quo balkanizes Iberia, transferring duchies to connected kingdoms, if appropriate, and making every kingdom within Iberia its own de jure empire, whilst permanently destroying Hispania. Ruling houses across the former struggle region gain a modifier for 2 centuries, making them better at fighting in lands of their own cultural heritage, whilst the capital counties of all independent rulers become strongholds for the next century. Some CBs within Iberia become more expensive. This is obviously very difficult to achieve, as they say down here as well, but don't worry about that yet. What I find interesting about this is that we explicitly have a solution here. We have an ending that has you work towards it, but doesn't require you to endlessly and needlessly blob. This is interesting to me, because commonly, when we have something that changes everything, like here, bringing the end to the struggle mechanic of Iberia, it comes also with the notion of blobbing. Think of, for example, the Isle of Man. I mean, you don't really need to blob, but think of Rome, think of the Holy Roman Empire. You need to blob there. This struggle can end without you doing this, and not over blobbing. It's just that simple. If you conquer all of Hispania, you will very likely be invincible. You can't be stopped anymore. What they did here is very, very smart, because it actually enables you to end the struggle, to engage with the struggle, and still end it without actually needing to also end your game. I'll be honest with you, I end games commonly if I am that big, but if I'm only a part of Iberia and the circumstances just changed again, maybe I'll be playing another 200 years, right? Very, very interesting concept. I like that they are implementing it in a way where you can be rewarded for just playing, for just role-playing, right? For leaving the diversity to play out rather than subjugating everybody. Big, big fan of that approach. Now here we come to a great additional paragraph, or two paragraphs. Future use. The Iberian struggle is our first go at a struggle system, and it's one we're fairly pleased with. That said, we have certainly taken note of how the feature seems to have caught the popular imagination over the last week or so, and we are very interested to hear your thoughts on, and now that there's a bit more information available. Needless to say, modders will be able to utilize this mechanic and share their creations from the release of 1.6 onwards. So, are there parts of the system you'd like to see refined and made more flexible? What are the struggles you'd like to see made in the future? What is your jankiest idea for how to use the struggle system? I have so many ideas. We could be here the entire day, and I'm not even kidding. You could come up with so much, be it total conversions, be it, for example, God Hedra can use this without a doubt. Tamriel, they can use this. The Skyrim Civil War, not the one from Skyrim, but the Skyrim Civil War in the bookmark of Elder Kings 2. They can use this. A Game of Thrones can use this. Everybody. The Fallen Eagle that has fallen and can't get up, they can use it as well. Then you have stuff like partition, inheritance. You have stuff like feudalization, mass conversion, invasions, dynamic struggles, right? You have rebellions, but you could potentially, technically, you could embed the entire system. Oh my god, you could embed societies in this. And this is the janky. No, it's not as janky as landless gameplay or marriage struggles. No, but you couldn't you technically? If you mark characters as involved, if they have a certain trait, such as, let's say, for example, devil worshipper, or let's say, you know, for example, a medicinal student, right? If you mark them as members of a society, such as, for example, the societies that we had in CK2, couldn't you genuinely make specific interactions between these characters then, and have phases of the societies being important or being unimportant, ultimately potentially ending them? Oh my god, couldn't you do that? I'm like, couldn't you do that? Couldn't you technically get that? I'm just saying, there's a lot of insane stuff here, okay? Of course, there are also a lot of historical struggles there. Again, the Christianizations that we talked about in particular. We got the Teutonic Crusade, we got the Albigensian, whatever you pronounce it, right? Crusade. You got the topic of, for example, the Holy Roman Empire, of the Reformation of it, the Carolingian Empire. You got the Byzantine Empire against the Seljuks. You got the Ghaznavids. You got the Crusades, of course. I mean, that's not even a question. You got the struggles, for example, in the Islamic world, when it comes to the Fatimids, when it comes to the caliphs in Iberia. You have so much potential on so many levels here. That's all I can say. Listen, I encourage you to leave comments explaining what you think would make for a good struggle. I struggle to find issues with this system, because even anything that I could criticize right now, oh, maybe this decision isn't quite right, who cares? You can fully mod this. You can fully edit that stuff. You can... I think we're going to see some insane stuff. We're going to see some insane stuff from modders. And then we're going to see some more reasonable, but hopefully very, very in-depth, generic and historical stuff from the dev team. Super, super excited. This is an outstanding mechanic. And with that, I'm logging off. It's been long enough. This is just... Seriously, if you want to debate struggles, let's do it. I'm up for it. There's so much stuff that could be going on. Imagine CK3, I don't know, doing a mod in a fairly small part of the world, and every particular region there would have its struggle as well, with the peculiarities that, of course, are going on there. You could have a struggle between excommunicated realms and the Catholic Church. Technically, but I think it would be too large. You could have the struggle between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. Mending the schism could be a struggle all of a sudden, instead of just, you know, a decision after you conquer enough. It's insane. I'll see you later, alligator.